Right, finally, we're at the action stage. Now, this is super important. I'm pretty sure for everyone I speak to, they always want to know, how do you get in contact with the right investors for your business?
Selling securities is really not dissimilar to selling any product or service, right? And so people talk about funnel marketing. In a way, that's what this is. You create a top of the funnel. You say, these are the people that we want to reach. Who are preferably your ideal prospects? Then you take that and you go through the funnel. You know, how are you going to contact them? You're going to do it through cold emails. You're going to do it by calling them. Are you going to follow them on Twitter?
Right.
Are you going to, get your friends to introduce you to them? That's the trick. And, there's no one right way to do it because there's a million different ways, just like with sales, that you're going to be able to get through the funnel. But the first question is, it's the who. Who first?
Right.
Okay. How are you going to come up with the prospect list? And there's free resources. Honestly, at Area Advisors, we invested a bunch of time to try and curate open source materials. We didn't want to violate anyone's copyright into what we call the Global Venture Finance Directory. Okay, it's a free database. There's lots of others, and we took basically lots of other free databases, and we're constantly adding to it. And if anyone's on the podcast and they want to send us other, directories, we can add that too. So that's a little bit like what I would say is panning for gold, right?
Okay.
Here's the river. There's lots of tributaries. There's lots of streams. Bring your own, panning for gold thing. Get in there, try and find the gold nuggets, and great. From that, they go into your prospect list. Okay. Another way to do it is to use a proprietary service. There's lots of companies now that have invested heavily into developing proprietary database. They know which individuals and firms are making investments. They have lots of data, but not surprisingly, it's expensive to get access to that data because they have to hire a whole bunch of people who are constantly researching and updating the database. So what we've done at our firm, we created something called the Investor Prospect Dream List. And what that is we work with a entrepreneur, could be first timer, it could be somebody who's already closed Series A or Series B funding, but they need to refresh the list or create the list. And then we do the query because we have access to it. It's proprietary, it's expensive database. And based on their stage, their industry, and their geographic region, we populate that. Spreadsheet, which in our case has 28 fields of data, that can also be supplemented. So, that becomes essentially your CRM system. Now, that in and of itself, you still need other systems, like an email system. Okay. Are you going to use some, third-party email sender? Is that a good idea or a bad idea? Are you going to get blocked? Are you? And so there's all sorts of strategies to make sure that whatever your outreach is, that you're not going to get blocked. So that's your funnel. Now, how you go through and use the funnel, different companies have different strategies. Obviously, if you can figure out how to get a warm introduction, that's the best. Sure. And then the other thing I've seen, particularly with companies that are a little bit more advanced, is they kind of create an A, B, and C list, and they sort of start at the bottom, and then they kind of get warmed up, and try to have as many meetings as they can to see what's the feedback, and then they get better and better, and they keep improving the pitch until they finally get to the top of the food chain and go for the, I think they call it the white rhino.
A white rhino?
Or whatever, I don't know. Remember that movie, Wall Street, where the guy's going for the elephant or the white rhino? Whatever it is. There is a hierarchy, right? And so there's the ideal people would be, in a perfect world, this is who you would choose to have back you. But hey, it's not a perfect world. So it's like,
Okay.
and that's basically how it works.
Okay, that's great. So it sounds like the first step of action is that you must get a prospect list, whether it's an open source list where you have to do the work to try and find suitable investors on an open source list, or a paid list, like a proprietary database list, where you actually have a refined custom search of what you might call smart money investors or ideal investors for your business. Okay, that's the first stage of action. What does it look like in terms of engagement with that list? How do you get your first appointment or your first meeting with an investor? How many calls do you have to make? How many emails do you have to send before you can successfully get into a meeting with an investor?
Yeah, I don't have a magic metric there. If you just read enough business books, most successful entrepreneurs will tell you that it took them anywhere from 100 to 300 meetings before they got their first check. Now, in a bubble economy like 2021 was, or 1999, might not take even 5 meetings. But I think in the current market, we're back to normal times, if not worse. And so it takes a lot of meetings. And so this is where, why is it that some salespeople can get a meeting and others can't? What's the secret sauce? Do you have to buy them a free lunch
Right.
to get a meeting? Is that a good idea or bad idea? I don't know. I mean, I've heard people say that that's a genius idea just because people are like, what? They're going to buy me a free lunch? Now, I mean, obviously investors are not going to go and have lunch with everyone just because they want to have a free lunch. But, you need to do whatever it takes to get the meeting. And then, once you have the meeting, obviously you need to convince them to have another meeting, right?
Right.
Because these things are usually not, except in the bubble market where everyone's like, oh, we got to make a decision like in 24 hours, which was happening actually. I think we're now, and it's going to take more than one meeting,
Okay.
right? So the purpose of the first meeting is to get the second meeting.
Okay.
Okay, but ultimately, if you're prepared and you have the toolkit, as soon as you feel like they've made the investment decision,
Yeah.
that you're prepared to move quickly.
Okay. So it does sound like, the first step of action is to get the prospect list, but it doesn't sound as easy as just, completing a mail shot or sending an email with, your toolkit, and then you suddenly just get an appointment or a meeting with an investor. Sounds like there's nurturing involved. I mean, what's the best way to nurture your prospect list?
Look, that's it's an art in my view, not a science, but it's to fish where the fish are.
Okay.
And to fish at the right time. So sticking with fishing, I know when I go to Alaska that if I go to certain rivers, there will be fish. I just know it. But I also know if I go at the wrong time, I won't catch any.
Okay.
So you got to be there at the river where the fish are at the time the fish want to bite,
Okay.
right? So that's the secret sauce, is how do you put yourself in a position so that you are fishing where the fish are and you're presenting them with a compelling offer, right?
Okay.
You're not trying to feed the fish the wrong lure, I mean, there's, so whoever those fish are that you're trying, that's the secret sauce. And that's why some people are very successful and some people aren't. It's no different than dating or fishing, or I'm not a hunter, but I suppose it'd be like hunting. I don't know. I guess, you're not killing anyone, but yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, to some degree.
Okay.
I mean, there's another thing here is, let's say you get you get that meeting,
Yep.
and maybe you get the second meeting, but then suddenly there's a negotiation that's occurring.
Sure.
I mean, realistically, is that something that you should expect if you're
Yep.
going through this process? And if so, how long could it take? How long could negotiation take?
It's all about supply and demand. If If it's a hot deal and you need to make a decision quickly, then you need to make a decision quickly. If it's not a hot deal, and people start saying, "Oh, hey, I like it. I might do it, but I'm pretty busy right now. Come back to me when you have 80% of the deal done." I've seen people do that. I want to be the last one in. I hate that.
Oh,
It's like what you want is you want a lead investor. Again, these are different sources of capital, but if you're in negotiations with somebody, then presumably they want to be a lead investor. Otherwise, they shouldn't be negotiating.
So what sort of things would they negotiate?
Well, they could negotiate valuation. They could negotiate deal terms like, oh, we don't actually want to do convertible debt. We want to do preferred stock. We won't do X. We want to do Y. Actually, we think we're special, so we want warrants on top of it. So there's a million things that they can do to beef it up, or change the liquidation preference. Like, oh well, in some markets, liquidation preferences were starting to go away. In the current market, they're starting to reappear, and sometimes you even see some nasty terms like 3x liquidation preference. I've seen that. I'm predicting we might see it again here, everything is negotiable.
So how does one ensure that you don't lose the deal in the negotiation stage?
You got to be reasonable, and you got to have a next best alternative.
So finally, when it comes to taking action, the end result really is closing the deal.
Yep.
So Brad, what could you offer in regards to how to successfully close a deal?
Just create a stampede effect and let people know that the deal, the train is leaving the station, and don't force people to do something prematurely on the one hand, but force them to make a decision.
Right.
Delay is not your friend.
Okay.
And what I like to say is a fast no is a lot better than a slow maybe.
Okay.
I hate maybes. Make a decision. Some people don't want to make a decision, and that's not in your best interest. That's in their best interest.
Okay. So if as an entrepreneur that's raising money, you've got to this negotiation stage, but this investor won't make a decision, what do you do then?
Move on.
You just walk away?
Well, if they haven't made a decision, you don't need to tell them you're out, because theoretically you're still in the market.
Okay.
It's just you move them down your priority list.
Okay. That's a really good insight, Brad. So could you give me an example of any firms that you may be aware of that were probably investor ready, but just failed to execute the go-to-market strategy?
I can think of a lot of firms. It's not uncommon. It's actually hard to execute it correctly. One that kind of sticks out in my mind is there was somebody who booked a call with me, and they were in the cybersecurity industry. And I thought they had a really good product. They were credible. They had established track record. They'd come out of leading cybersecurity firms and founded their own firm. It was based in Eastern Europe, and I think it was Poland. I can't remember. One of the Eastern European countries. So the CEO was like, God, I've been pitching this deal for a year, and I just haven't been able to get anyone to engage. I haven't been able to get any VCs to do the deal. And I said, wow, okay. I said, well, what have you been doing? And he says, well, I pitched to some VCs. And I said, well, how many? And he goes, well, I don't know, 5. And I said, so you had 5 face-to-face meetings with VCs? And he's like, no. I sent the deck to 5 VCs. And I'm like, okay. And what happened? He said, nothing happened. That's it. And he was like, yeah, nobody wants to meet with us. And I was just like, wow, this guy, he's running a real business. He's got good customers. He's got what appear to be a really talented dev staff. And, I never heard from him again either. So, it's not good enough. And if you do have like I thought in his case he had a pretty credible story. If you don't like present it enough time, and I don't know how much is enough, but I can tell you 5 isn't enough.
Okay.
Okay, I don't think 100 is enough.
Okay.
I think you got to just keep doing it until you get a sufficient number of meetings. And I don't know if you send out 100 communications and you get, say, 4 meetings.
Yeah.
Is that a good ratio? I would say it is.
Okay.
Okay, and I can back that up, with some data that I got from, one of the accelerators who believe that even with a sort of a curated, ideal sort of dream list, honestly, if you can get, I think best practice would be maybe you get 10 or 20 meetings, especially if you're going in with warm introductions. Maybe you could get, in a good market, 3 or 4 competing offers. But it might take a lot more. That's all I can say. And in the masterclass, I do talk about some very successful entrepreneurs who talk about how it took them something like 234 meetings in order to close their first $500,000. So even the best entrepreneurs, it all depends on the markets, but this is not easy, and I would say more is better than less until you get the right investors.
So it sounds pretty much like it's a numbers game, and if you are taking action and you are looking to close investors, you shouldn't be disheartened if you don't get a response from your first, let's say, 10 or 20 emails that you send out. You should keep going and increase the volume.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a numbers game, and it's a question of how compelling is it? What's your strategy? Is it really just a cold outreach? I mean, let's be honest. What's the response rate on a cold email? Usually not that high. There are examples, though. I mean, I'm not saying cold emails don't work.
Yeah.
But maybe on Twitter, maybe you're a clever person and you figure out a strategy on Twitter. Or maybe you figure out through some other, Instagram, LinkedIn. You're engaging. You're going to the local meetups. You're doing the angel networks. You're going to the here in Europe. You're going to the web summits. It requires active, meaningful, full time. I mean, when I say full time, I mean raising money can be very hard and time consuming, and frankly, that's the CEO's job.
Okay.
You can't outsource this job, I don't think.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, if you're an established company and you have an operating history, that's what investment banks do.
Yeah.
But what are they selling? They're selling an operating history and a growth strategy. But even then, the CEO ultimately is going to have to sell the deal. But especially with the early stage companies, it's the CEO's job. It's not some, part-time person, or I personally am not a big fan of finders for a variety of reasons, but for early stage companies, the CEO has to sell the deal.
I often speak with, entrepreneurs that say, hey, I'd rather just work with an organization or a company that can just find the investor for me and just take, a finder's fee or some equity. So what is your take on that?
My take is it really depends on the stage of the company and the jurisdiction. The reason I say stage and jurisdiction, in the United States, the SEC takes a very dim view on finders. What they define, anyone who gets paid a compensation, whether they call themselves a consultant or a finder, they are required under SEC law, both state and in most state and federal. I mean, not all states, but most states. Now, what does that mean? If you're an unregistered, if you're somebody engaged in unregistered broker-dealer activity, it's a problem. And I don't have time to get into it, but just Google it. There's tons of articles about why it's not a good idea if you're raising money in the United States. Now, outside the United States, it's very different. I mean, some people, and logically could say, hey, what's the big deal? It's just a sales commission. In the U.S., they see it differently. It's protecting investors. In other countries, it's not illegal, and so maybe having a finder is okay. Maybe it's not illegal, for example. Having said that, though, it's hard. It depends on the stage. So if you're hiring an investment bank,
Yeah.
Investment banks get paid a lot of money to do a lot of work, and they put their firm's reputation on the line. Okay. So you put together a private placement memo, you stamp it with, XYZ investment bank, their reputation's on the line, right? Because they're in the business of doing, and who's their real customer? Okay. Is it the issuer or is it the investor? If you're in the deal business of bringing deals to investors, the repeat customer is the investor, right? And so it's not in the placement agent's best interest to bring shitty deals to the, low quality deals to the market, right? Not if they want to keep going back to those investors, right? And so, that's how investment banks work. Now with these finders, in certain European markets, I don't want to say that, nobody's going to invest because so-and-so introduced the deal as the finder. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, because that was going to be the next question.
Yeah.
Is it any easier to close a deal if you work with a finder or a placement agent?
What a good placement agent does is they do everything I just mentioned in the 9-step process.
Okay.
That's what they do. They make sure that every single step is covered. Okay. And then they're responsible for making sure that the deal docs are true, complete, and accurate, that the go-to-market strategy, including the ideal investors, it's inappropriate, that the meetings happen, and that post-meeting they take action. That's what they're doing. They're providing that. And for that, they get paid a good fee. So it's a valuable service. Yeah. It's just, it really depends on the stage and the geography, or the jurisdiction, I should say.
We've come to the end of the action stage. And Brad, thank you so much for providing so much clarity in regards to how best you can take action when it comes to your fundraising. So what's important here in the action stage is that we've covered that, firstly, to take action, you need a prospect list. Secondly, we spoke about the best ways and best practice of nurturing that prospect list. And finally, we spoke about what's involved in actually closing the deal. So if there's anything else that you'd like to add, Brad, I'm sure the audience would love to hear it.
I think we've covered it. I mean, the 9-step process really is the same process that even, investment banks use when they do an IPO. So it's a proven process. Obviously, the more sophisticated the deal, the more sophisticated some of the due diligence lockers and deal docs need to be. But in a sense, I guess what I'm saying, it's not that different than designing, developing, marketing, and selling any product or service. Because that's what it is. You're selling a product. You're selling a piece of paper. You're selling a dream that if a third party gives you money, that you're going to give them something later. Hopefully it's going to be worth more than what they gave you.
Makes sense.
That's the product.
Makes a lot of sense.
It's very simple.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Brad.
All right.